The Third Reich was a regime of contradictions, where towering ideals of power and purity hid the darkest of secrets.
Throughout Germany, persecution was systematic and merciless. Bands of stormtroopers roved the streets, beating and arresting Jews without cause.
War has struck again.
By April 25th, Berlin found itself completely surrounded by the Red Armies. The day and night artillery bombardment began.
Beneath the propaganda of 1,000 banners and speeches, the Nazi state was a labyrinth of cruelty, deception, and violence. Its true horrors obscured until the very end. At the center of this destructive empire stood Adolf Hitler, a man who orchestrated some of the worst atrocities in history, but whose private life remained veiled in mystery.
This is the will of God. Now it is obvious why I think it is my duty to the nation to save the German people from the danger of communism.
Among those most hidden from the public eye was Eva Braun. His companion, confidant, and eventual wife, whose relationship with Hitler would remain largely in the shadows.
It's a sort of relationship that Hitler sort of thinks he should probably have to make him feel normal, but actually I don't think it's a relationship that Hitler really needs.
Her camera, along with the tapes she left behind, has provided us with a rare and chilling insight into the secrets of the Third Reich. Eva Braun, a German photographer and one of history's most capricious figures, was the longtime companion and briefly the wife of Adolf Hitler. Their fateful meeting occurred in Munich, where the 17-year-old Braun worked as an assistant and model for Hitler's personal photographer. 2 years later, her relationship with Hitler deepened, and she became a constant presence in his inner circle. Braun's passion for film and photography offers a rare and intimate glimpse into the private lives of Hitler and the Nazi Party leadership. Her work provides behind-the-scenes views of a regime shrouded in propaganda and secrecy. Utilizing advanced AI technology, we have enhanced the quality of this footage, bringing them to life as never before. Eva and her sister Gretel shared a deep bond, spending much of their time together and enjoying a variety of hobbies, including swimming and skiing. At the age of 17, Eva took a job working for Heinrich Hoffmann, the official photographer of the Nazi Party. In Hoffmann's studio, Eva discovered her passion for photography and filmmaking, teaching herself the intricacies of operating a camera and developing film. It was in this environment that she first encountered Adolf Hitler. Hoffmann, a close associate of the Nazi leader, frequently visited the shop, and it was during these visits that Hitler, despite being 23 years her senior, took a particular interest in Eva. Through her work with Hoffmann, Eva had the opportunity to travel with the Nazi Party, bringing her into closer proximity with Hitler. While she was frequently seen in his presence, she was never alone with him. And their encounters were always within the confines of the public and the party's official circles. Eva and Hitler began an illicit relationship, sharing several secret dates that were carefully kept out of the public eye. The true depth of Hitler's feelings for her remain uncertain, as their interactions were often shrouded in ambiguity.
Hitler met Eva Braun in October 1929. She was working as an assistant for the photographer in his studio, the photographer Heinrich Hoffmann. So Hitler visited, and it's said that he devoured her with his eyes on this first meeting. And there's sort of very much that sense that she really adored him, and he would take her out on outings to the opera, to dinner, for a drive, that kind of thing, and she quickly became very infatuated with him.
Through her work with Hoffmann, Eva had the chance to travel alongside the Nazi Party, which allowed her to be in closer proximity to Hitler. Although she was often seen in his company, their meetings were always in public settings, within the strict confines of party events. She was never alone with him, and their interactions remained carefully controlled, never straying beyond the boundaries of the official party apparatus.
She's a very, very difficult character to put one's finger on. Why? Because she was very much kept in the background by Hitler, because Hitler was very keen not to lose favour with German women by seeming, by cutting himself off with his own wife or a girlfriend. So, she was very much kept in the background. What's remarkable about Hitler's appeal is that he was absolutely adored by so many women. I think this is extraordinary when you look at Hitler today. And he's not a physically particularly impressive specimen, and not, I suggest, a figure that many women would find particularly attractive. But a lot of women did find him attractive because he was powerful, but also because I think that he brought out a sense of needing to be mothered. And people felt that, the Fuhrer looks after us, but we can also look after him as well. And this is why he deliberately, and not until the very last few days of his life, why he never really wanted to be publicly associated with a woman, i.e. get married or have a girlfriend, because he sort of felt that he was married to all German, and indeed the German people at large.
By 1933, the Nazi Party had become the largest faction in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. With his delusions of grandeur increasingly taking hold, Hitler saw himself as the sole savior of the nation, destined to lead Germany into a new era. Although he used the democratic system to build his popularity, his true aim was to dismantle it entirely. When President Paul von Hindenburg, frail and ailing, became less able to govern, Hitler seized the opportunity. Through political maneuvering and intense pressure on the Reichstag, he persuaded Parliament to pass the Enabling Act, granting him emergency powers. This law effectively suspended the Weimar Constitution, allowing Hitler to rule by decree and mark the beginning of his absolute control over Germany.
On the 30th of January 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, but of a coalition government. So there were just 3 Nazi posts in that coalition government.
It's very tempting to think that when Hitler comes to power in early 1933, that his grip on power is absolutely total. In fact, he has a very uneven, shaky start. He's still quite worried about public opinion. So what he does is a mixture of passing various laws that give him more and more power, like the Enabling Act, that actually makes him immensely powerful. But also, he takes advantage of various events like the Reichstag fire, in which the German Parliament building burns down. Now, it's highly likely, but never proven, whether the Nazis actually burnt it down themselves. But certainly, in a sense, it doesn't matter. What happens is that Hitler and the Nazis took advantage of the Reichstag burning down to show that there was a communist plot against what the Nazis described as still being a democratic government. And it enabled them to seize more power, by emergency decree.
Very quickly, he turned Germany into a one-party state. So first of all, he made sure to eliminate the influence and power of the German political left. So the Socialist Party and the Communist Party, for a start, were banned. But over a short amount of time as well, the Nazi Party was the only legal party too. So that's very important. The other thing that the Nazi Party did, that Hitler did in those first few months of 1933, was to eliminate the German trade union movement. So in May 1933, trade unions were banned, and in their place came an organisation called the German Labour Front, led by Robert Ley.
Eventually, in January 1933, he becomes Chancellor. Now, don't forget, Chancellor in Germany, and this still remains today, is not, at the time, the head of state. The head of state is the president. So it's the Chancellor, though, who has the real executive power.
The German people, largely supportive of Hitler's rise to power, were unaware of the horrors that lay ahead. Driven by a combination of fear, propaganda, and a sense of national renewal, many believed that Hitler's leadership would restore Germany's strength and pride. The promises of economic recovery, national unity, and the rebuilding of a fractured nation resonated deeply with a population scarred by the aftermath of World War I and the Great Depression. However, they remained largely blind to the dark path he was preparing to take the country on, one that would soon lead to widespread persecution, war, and unimaginable suffering. The true extent of Hitler's brutal agenda was hidden behind a carefully crafted image, and the German people, at least in the early years, were unable to grasp the magnitude of the horrors that would soon unfold.
By and large, the opinion of Hitler within Nazi Germany from the years he was in power, from 1933 all the way through to 1945, it varied considerably. Now, of course, like a lot of political leaders coming into power, when he started, he was really very popular. Yes, there were certainly people who had misgivings about him, but certainly within the first few years in which he was in power, and it seemed like the economy was going well, the majority of people in Germany, I think it's fair to say, really liked Hitler, and they thought that actually he is transforming our nation. We were on our knees, and now just a few years later, we're almost on top of the world. So yes, by and large, to begin with, public opinion of Hitler was incredibly positive. But of course, this starts to change when things go wrong. At the beginning of the war, he's invading countries left, right and centre. Militarily, things are going brilliantly, so therefore everyone loves the leader. But what happens next is, of course, the Russian campaign goes badly, and of course, when the Allies invade northern France on D-Day, June 1944, and those forces punch their way into Germany, and the Russians are punching from the other way, of course, people's opinion about Hitler, is by and large negative. The big problem for the public, of course, is they can't express that negativity because it's a dictatorship. But certainly by the end of the war, January 45 through to the capitulation in May, public opinion of Hitler is at rock bottom.
Eva was growing increasingly attached to Hitler, with no attention being shown towards her.
Hitler's relationship with her was very much kept from public view and just known among the very, very private inner circle.
This influenced her first suicide attempt, predicted to be around the 10th or 11th of August, 1932. She shot herself in the chest with her father's pistol. Thankfully, the wounds were not fatal. This was suggested to be an outcry for Hitler's attention. After this, he began to commit himself to her more, and they became supposed lovers by the end of that year. She often stayed overnight at his Munich apartment whilst he was in town.
It's very unclear as to what sort of relationship that Hitler actually had with Eva Braun. How sexualized it was, again, is impossible to say. But the fact is, it clearly was not a normal kind of relationship. It wasn't boyfriend and girlfriend. I suppose today we might call it arm candy in some way. But it wasn't public arm candy, because Hitler would never go around in public with Eva Braun in the same way as politicians today will go around with their wife or their husband or boyfriend or girlfriend. So it's a sort of relationship that Hitler sort of thinks he should probably have to make him feel normal, but actually I don't think it's a relationship that Hitler really needs.
According to a fragment of her diary and the account of biographers, her second suicide attempt occurred in May 1935. She took an overdose of sleeping pills when Hitler failed to make time for her in his life. This prompted Hitler to provide Eva and her sister Gretel with an apartment in Munich that year. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were introduced, marking a brutal turning point in Nazi anti-Semitic policy. These laws, designed to further isolate and dehumanize the Jewish population, were presented as a solution to the supposed threat Jews posed to the German nation. Hitler, using a relentless campaign of propaganda, convinced many Germans that Jews were to blame for the country's previous struggles, including its defeat in World War I and the economic hardship of the Great Depression. The Nuremberg Laws made marriage between Jews and non-Jews illegal and stripped Jews of their citizenship and civil rights, rendering them second-class citizens in their own country.
So we know that from as early as Hitler's writings in Mein Kampf that he was personally anti-Semitic. And what we see once the Third Reich comes into power is his personal anti-Semitism translated into state policy. So from the very earliest days and months of the Third Reich, there were many different measures, legal measures taken against the Jews, and also illegal measures as well.
Just as he had promised in Mein Kampf, Hitler is treating the Jews in Germany as an internal enemy. So what you see are laws stripping Jews of their German citizenship. You see awful things like Jews not being allowed to go to swimming pools, because if a Jew swam in a public swimming pool, the water would have to be drained because the Jew had dirtied the water. So you can see that you've got this sort of awful both political and cultural exclusion of the Jewish community.
In November 1938, during what became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, the violence escalated dramatically. Over 7,000 Jewish-owned shops were destroyed, and more than 400 synagogues were burned to the ground. The Night of Terror also saw the arrest and violent mistreatment of thousands of Jews, many of whom were sent to concentration camps. This coordinated attack on Jewish businesses, homes, and religious sites was not only a demonstration of the Nazis' growing power, but also a clear signal of the horrors to come in the years leading up to the Holocaust.
The Nazis just literally set fire to synagogues everywhere, they smash up Jewish shops and Jews are killed.
Practically every synagogue in the land was burnt down. Near on 100 people were killed in the course of the night, and between 20 and 30,000 German Jews were taken to concentration camps.
This absolutely horrific destruction, slaughter, violence carried out by the state against its own people. It showed the world what Hitler was. He was effectively a gangster and a murderer.
As the violence and discrimination against Jews escalated, many Germans began to grasp the severity of Hitler's anti-Semitic agenda, though the full scale of the atrocities to come remained largely unknown.
After the Night of the Broken Glass, the situation for Germany's Jews just got worse and worse from then until the war, and of course during the war as well. They were impoverished, they were made to pay a big atonement fine. Money was taken from them in order to pay for this calamity that they'd allegedly brought upon themselves. There's no doubt about the centrality of anti-Semitism to Hitler's worldview. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But what he seemed to be trying to do was sort of stay in the shadows, so that when we get a pogrom like this, that the public, the German public and the population were quite affronted by it. Maybe not because they particularly supported the Jews, but because it was a sort of flagrant violation of law and order, and sort of a kind of very violent affair across the land. So there wasn't, it wasn't popular in that respect. So there's that idea then that Hitler was sort of staying in the shadows and not being associated with that. I think he managed to maintain his popularity during this time. First of all, because he was staying in the shadows of more unpopular policies. And there was certainly that sentiment among the German population, because of this myth that surrounded the Führer, that, well, if there were unpleasant things going on or policies that they didn't like, all of those sort of more difficult aspects of the Third Reich, then somehow that Hitler couldn't know about it, that he wasn't associated with it, that it had to be one of the other leaders. It can't have been him. If only the Führer knew, this wouldn't be happening.
Alongside his escalating persecution of Jews, Hitler remained committed to the promises he made in Mein Kampf, focusing on rebuilding Germany's strength and dominance in Europe. Factories were converted to support the rapid expansion of the German military, turning it into one of the most advanced and formidable fighting forces on the continent. This military build-up was in service of his broader vision for Lebensraum, the idea of living space for the German people. According to Hitler, Germany had the right to reclaim and expand into the territories he believed were rightfully theirs, particularly in Eastern Europe. As Germany annexed territories and reclaimed lost land, such as Austria and Czechoslovakia, Britain and France, though vocal in their opposition, remained largely passive. Despite their protests, neither country took significant action to stop Hitler's expansionist ambitions. Hitler, growing increasingly confident in his strategy, saw their warnings as empty threats. After all, they had never acted on them before.
More far-sighted people in Britain and France are sort of going, well, where's this going to end? Because if you keep giving someone something, they're going to keep wanting more, because that's human nature, and that's what Hitler did.
However, when Hitler turned his attention to Poland in 1939, the situation changed. The plans for invasion were clear, and Britain and France, realizing the imminent danger, finally pledged to declare war if Germany invaded Poland. Confident that they would falter once again, Hitler pressed ahead with his plans, marking the beginning of World War II. The Berghof, a secluded retreat nestled in the Obersalzberg mountains above the town of Berchtesgaden, became one of Hitler's most important personal sanctuaries. In 1934, he began extensive renovations to transform the small house he had acquired into a grand fortress. The goal was to create a private residence, not only for himself, but also for his closest party members and loyal followers, offering them a refuge in the stunning isolation of the Bavarian Alps. Chosen for its remote and strategic location, the Berghof allowed Hitler to escape the pressures of his increasingly demanding role as the dictator of Germany. Surrounded by breathtaking views and far removed from the everyday affairs of his political life, Hitler could find some respite from the stress and responsibility of ruling. The retreat, with its luxurious accommodations and isolation, served as both a place of relaxation and a symbol of the regime's growing power, where Hitler could unwind and indulge in the quiet solitude of the mountains, away from the watchful eyes of the public and the growing unrest of the outside world. Hitler's growing preference for the Berghof only served to enhance the Führer myth, portraying him as a semi-mythical figure who needed to retreat to his mountain hideaway to escape the pressures of his leadership. Yet, as the years passed, his increasing isolation also raised questions about his commitment to Germany. Why was the leader of the nation hiding away in a secluded retreat? When would he make another public appearance? At the Berghof, Hitler maintained strict control over who could gain access to him. Only his most trusted and loyal party members were invited to join him for dinners and meetings, making the retreat an exclusive space for the inner circle of the Nazi regime. The atmosphere at the Berghof was one of secrecy and privilege, where those in Hitler's confidence could gather for both casual events and serious discussions about the future of the country. Over time, the Berghof expanded. A large wing was added to the house, and several additional buildings were constructed, transforming the small residence into an impressive and heavily fortified complex. The entire area was fenced off, and the remaining houses on the mountain were bought by the Nazi Party and eventually demolished, making the Berghof a private, self-contained compound. Hitler's access to the retreat was ensured by a private guarded road, which provided him with a direct and secure route to his mountain sanctuary. Once there, Hitler would often rise late in the afternoon, not starting his day until around 2 p.m. His nights were equally irregular, with him often not sleeping until well past 4 a.m. Despite being the head of state, he spent less and less time engaging with the public or even his ministers, instead preferring to control the direction of the country from his remote mountain retreat. His public appearances dwindled, and his increasing detachment from the daily affairs of Germany led many to question whether he was still fully in control, or whether his isolation had begun to distance him from the reality of the war and the regime he had created. Eva was often described by her cousin as one of the most unhappy individuals she had ever encountered. Despite her sheltered, isolated life, she was not a person who seemed to fit the role of someone so detached from the world around her. After her sister married one of Hitler's high-ranking SS generals, Eva found herself with more opportunities to interact with the Nazi elite, spending time with her sister and their powerful circle. But no matter how close she grew to this world, she could never escape the emotional gulf that separated her from Hitler, a distance that would define much of her life. Eva often spent time at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria, whenever he was there. But even within the secluded walls of his inner sanctum, public affection was forbidden. An unspoken rule that left her feeling ignored and distant, despite her physical proximity to Hitler. Their relationship, which is said to have lasted for 16 years, remained shrouded in secrecy. Hitler never publicly acknowledged his commitment to Eva, and on the rare occasion she accompanied him, she was always kept at arm's length. Eva was never more than a shadow in his life, relegated to the background, even in the most intimate of settings. Eva's passion for photography and film has proven invaluable in offering a rare glimpse into the private world of Adolf Hitler, far beyond the propaganda and the carefully crafted image of the Führer. Through her lens, we are given an intimate, often unsettling view of the man behind the myth. While Hitler sought solace in the isolation of the Bavarian Alps, enjoying the peaceful surroundings of his mountain retreat, his once mighty empire was crumbling. On September 1st, 1939, Adolf Hitler launched his invasion of Poland, an act that would ignite the flames of World War II. It was a reckless and catastrophic decision, one that many historians argue he underestimated in its scope and consequences. For the first time, foreign leaders and the world at large began to witness the true extent of Hitler's madness, his ruthless ambition, and the chaos he was willing to unleash. But for Eva, this was the man to whom she'd been drawn. Despite the growing evidence of his brutality and instability, she remained tethered to him, an emotional connection that would persist even as the world around her descended into war and ruin.
In September 1939, Hitler invades Poland. along with Stalin. Stalin also, Soviet Russia, also invades Poland at the same time. But what the world remembers is the fact that Hitler invaded Poland, and a couple of days later, the British declare war on Germany.
The German population, because of Hitler's popularity, and even though they had experienced the horrors of the First World War and the trench warfare of the First World War, and all of the shell shock and everything that went with it, because he was so popular, they might not have been delighted to go to war in September 1939, but they went along with it.
As the war drew to a close, the Führer remained ensconced in his secluded refuge. Seemingly unaware or indifferent to the catastrophic unraveling of his vision for a 1,000-year Reich, his leadership, once seen as absolute, was now marked by growing paranoia and distrust. Rumors of assassination attempts against him began to swirl, casting a long shadow over his reign. In the wake of these threats, Hitler's visits to his secluded Berghof retreat became less frequent. By July 1944, after an attempted assassination known as the July 20th plot, he ceased visiting the retreat altogether. The plot involved a bomb planted inside a briefcase, positioned under the table during one of his meetings, a failed attempt that would only intensify his obsession with security and control.
Bomb goes off and the whole building basically destroyed. There's no way anybody can survive. But miracle upon miracle, Hitler survives because this oak table is so heavy, so over-engineered, that actually it absorbs so much of the blast that Hitler gets away with, I think, a perforated eardrum, some torn trousers, and a bit of shock.
Though he survived, the attempt left a deep psychological scar, intensifying his mistrust of those around him. In the months that followed, Hitler's health began to visibly deteriorate. A tremor, once barely noticeable, became more pronounced, a physical sign of the psychological toll that the war and the constant fear of betrayal was taking on him. He grew more reliant on prescription drugs, including powerful stimulants and sedatives, to manage the crushing stress and to numb his growing sense of panic. What had once been an unyielding, calculating leader was now a man teetering on the edge of collapse.
He survives this absolutely huge blast, and people look at the building and think, how can anybody have survived that? He's incredibly lucky, and as a result, of course, the bomb plot fails. And all the people who are involved, the conspirators, are rounded up. Some of them are executed summarily. Some of them are famously strung up and hanged with piano wire and filmed. And their executions are supposedly watched by Hitler repeatedly. This is a really, really devastating blow for any resistance in the Third Reich.
But it wasn't just assassination plots that threatened him. The very foundation of his regime was under siege. In August 1944, the British Royal Air Force launched a devastating bombing raid on the Obersalzberg, Hitler's mountain retreat, known for its picturesque views and supposed high-altitude health benefits. Hundreds of RAF heavy bombers targeted the area, and at least 2 bombs struck the Berghof, Hitler's personal residence, causing significant damage. By this time, Hitler had already fled to his underground bunker in Berlin, leaving the once impregnable retreat in ruins. The bombing raid was another symbol of how far the Third Reich had fallen, as even the man who had once controlled the fate of Europe now found himself forced to retreat into the shadows.
Once the Red Army came into German territory in 1945, then Hitler's position as this infallible ruler and leader really not only became to be called into question, but really came to its end. because the Soviet troops were very vengeful. They were retaliating for all the terrible brutalities and atrocities that the Nazis and the German army had put into place in Soviet territory. What it meant was that they were coming closer and closer on their journey westwards to Berlin, and eventually Hitler and a very small inner circle around him had to retreat to his bunker, his underground bunker.
In the final days of his life, Adolf Hitler had become a shadow of the man who once commanded a powerful empire. The Führer, now a demented dictator, struggled to maintain control over a collapsing Third Reich, one that had already been reduced to a phantom state. His once loyal army, now fragmented and demoralized, had little desire to follow his increasingly erratic orders. By this point, Hitler believed that Germany had failed him, that the country no longer deserved his rule or the vision he had once promised. In his delusional state, he sought to bring it all down with him. The idea of Germany's destruction became a twisted form of retribution. He no longer saw the nation as something worth saving, but as a nation that should collapse entirely, consumed by the same chaos and ruin he had brought upon it.
This is a war brought about by Hitler, and this is a war that Hitler has fought for too long, and he's fighting it to the death. And he's fighting it to the death of the people who he supposedly loves, and he no longer loves them by the end of the war. And he says that basically the German people don't deserve him, the German people don't deserve Germany, and everybody should fight to the death because basically, they don't deserve to be alive because they failed him. Classic narcissistic thinking. The world is for him, and he's not there for the world.
Only one person stood by his side, Eva Braun. Despite the Reich's total collapse, Braun never wavered in her loyalty to Hitler, her presence a constant in his increasingly erratic mind. She became both a companion and a supporter of his distorted vision, helping to fuel the fantasy that he remained the unchallenged leader of a once great empire, even as it all slipped away. On his birthday, April 20th, 1945, Hitler brought Eva Braun to the crumbling Reich Chancellery to join his private celebration. For many within the Nazi ranks, this was a stark signal that the end was near. Hitler had always kept Eva out of the public eye, shielding her from the grim realities of his regime. But on this day, as Berlin was being consumed by the collapse of the Third Reich, he allowed her to be seen with him. By April 30th, 1945, Hitler had fully grasped that Germany was beyond salvation. The war was lost, and the Reich was crumbling around him. He hadn't made a public appearance or delivered a speech in months. His earlier victories had become distant memories. Hitler relied on a cocktail of drugs to keep his fragile mind from unraveling as he watched the final days of his reign slip away.
Hitler's last days in the Führer bunker under the Reich Chancellery in the centre of Berlin, are a kind of terrible end of a Shakespearean tragedy, as the thunder of Russian artillery all around them, and they're deep inside this sort of concrete underground fortress. Everybody's sort of kind of going mad, and especially Hitler.
On this day, he finally agrees to marry Eva Braun, just hours away from their suicide. They tie the knot with what was left of Hitler's loyal advisors as witnesses.
Finally, after many years of being Hitler's long-term partner, Hitler married Eva Braun that night. It was to be a very short-lived marriage because 2 days later, they both committed suicide together.
He hands her a cyanide capsule, and he holds his pistol. Together, they commit suicide, leaving Germany in ruins.
Their bodies are burnt in this great kind of almost like a sort of Viking pyre, like in a Viking longship going up.
Europe's most evil dictator is dead. Just over a week later, on May 8, 1945, Germany formally surrendered, bringing an end to the Second World War in Europe. But while the fighting ceased, the full extent of the horrors that had unfolded under Hitler's rule would only begin to surface. As the Allies advanced and the death camps were liberated, the world was confronted with the appalling truth of the Holocaust. The images of emaciated survivors, the piles of bodies and the remnants of systematic genocide shocked humanity to its core. The world came to understand the true scale of the atrocities committed under Nazi rule.
Ultimately, when it was shown quite how evil Nazism was and the German people fully appreciated it, then, yes, the opinion of Hitler was not quite so positive.
The mass murder of 6 million Jews, millions more from other persecuted groups, and the unspeakable horrors carried out in the name of Aryan supremacy. In the wake of Hitler's death and Germany's surrender, the horrifying legacy of the Nazi regime became undeniable. The world could no longer ignore the depth of the evil that had been unleashed, and the survivors were left to bear witness to the unimaginable suffering that had been inflicted upon them. The horrors of the death camps would haunt the world for generations to come. A stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty when unchecked by morality. Amidst this, the story of Eva Braun, once a loyal companion to a mad dictator, would be forever tied to the collapse of the regime she had once stood by, offering a chilling glimpse into the mind of a leader consumed by power, paranoia, and a total disregard for humanity. Without her tapes, we would not have a chilling look behind the secrets of the Third Reich. Through these images and recordings, we are given a glimpse behind the carefully crafted facade of power and propaganda, exposing the private moments of a regime on the brink of collapse. What was once hidden in the shadows, the human side of Hitler's reign, his closest confidants, and the quiet complicity of those around him, now stands revealed, offering a haunting record of the final days of Nazi Germany.
This is the will of God. Now it is obvious why I think it is my duty to the nation to save the German people from the danger of communism.
These tapes and photographs, taken by Eva Braun herself, have become invaluable artifacts, shedding light on the inner workings of one of history's most destructive empires.